G'day folks, wherever you are, joining us for the Wednesday webcast with Mike, whether you're live with us in the room right now or whether you're picking this up via a recording later on, welcome. We've been spending a bit of time on Wednesdays discussing useful tactics and strategies for people in leadership and individually dealing with COVID as it rolls out across the world. And initially we started looking at the crisis end of that, and particularly as our home country of Australia has begun emerging from that into more recovery and longevity territory, recognising that there's many countries that are still deep in the curve and trying to reverse that. It's my great pleasure to have my guest Jeremy Watkins with us today. Jeremy's an expert in leadership and vitality and performance, and I've personally benefited from working with Jeremy over the last little while. He made a very generous offer to me when COVID started, really, to sort of dip into one of his programs that was around vitality and energy, and I found it really, really useful. So I thought he'd be great to get on, given our theme this month has very much revolved around personal aspects of leadership and life and improvement. So Jez, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Mike, and it was a pleasure to have you on the program. I sometimes feel that when we run these programs that actually we learn more than we actually teach. So I thank you for your massive contribution to that program, because as always, it's a pleasure to spend time with you.
Indeed, thank you. So I'm interested in this notion. You frame a lot of what you do about being better, or getting better, and it's kind of that edge of improvement. And we've had a few conversations during this month where we've kind of explored the tension between how do you hold that wanting to be better with up against the potential tension it creates, which is I'm not good enough.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think that's a really cool introduction to a conversation, I reckon. Because my whole frame of be better very much comes from the opposite side of the place, of saying, even though there's always tension in looking to be better, because if there wasn't, then we wouldn't have any motivation to actually make a change. I think how we approach that construct of being better is fundamental to how successful we become in actually being better. Because if we approach it, and I love the fact that you were just speaking before about, are you approaching things from a victim mentality, or are we approaching things from the other spectrum? And I think that is super important, that we start to build the self-awareness of whether we're approaching things from an I'm not good enough frame, or whether we approach things from a I'm already good enough, and what I'm simply looking to do is to explore the possibilities of what else could I do, how else could I be, that would actually help me be a better person to be around, and what would help me be a better leader, what would help me improve my performance, what would help me be a better dad, what would help me be a better team player. And I think the questions you can ask about being better go on and on and on, but I reckon the most important kind of entry point into this is to go, if you're truly exploring being better from the right place, I think it's kind of useful to put aside the I'm not good enough conversation. Even though I'm highly, deeply respectful of the fact that that is a rhetoric that goes on in people's minds, and I reckon we need to bust a myth here that just because someone's showing a huge amount of external confidence in the way that they're talking about things doesn't mean that even for a microsecond there may be an element going on in the back of their heads that actually is existing. And I think here comes the tension of where being better comes from, is that each time we level up to a whole new level, I think it's natural and completely human to kind of question, crikey, am I good enough to do this?
Mm.
And I think that would be, I mean, maybe this is just my map of the world, hey? But I think it would be maybe not that self-aware to not have that, but hold on to that in a way that's healthy, not in a way that's unhelpful.
Mm.
Because I think that wanting to explore and that wanting to get better is I think so important to the whole concept of progress. Like, how do we get better as a society? How do we get better as a world? You know, you can take it to whatever meta level you kind of want to take it to, and that's why I'm a bit obsessed about being better and what better really means, because it's kind of exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you know, when I wrote Thrive and Adapt a couple of years ago, I was talking a bit about expectations in there and how they're a real two-edged sword for people. You know, on the one hand, they're really the only reason that human beings have ever made any progress is that we have expectations that things could be different. And then on the other hand, they're also the thing that creates some of the biggest traps for us, because, you know, if they're not met, that leads to disappointment. It can lead to unrealistic expectations where we're striving for things that are so far outside of what's actually possible that we're never going to get there. And, you know, you hold that against the tension of, you know, there's that whole Buddhist mind frame that says that, you know, expectations are one of the fastest roads to disappointment and dissatisfaction and unhappiness.
Yeah.
So one of the bits of work I encourage people to do is hold their expectations lightly. You know, you got to kind of, I think, have them. They're a possibly even inevitable piece of being human. But if we hang on to them too tightly, they can really stuff us up. So from your point of view, what's some of the territory that sort of helps people to navigate that gulf, I guess, but the tension that's created? Because like you said, without the tension, nothing happens.
Yeah.
We just go, well, I'm content here and that'll do.
Yeah.
Too much tension, things break.
Hey, I love this conversation. This is awesome. I think there's so my backstory that you know, Mike, which is quite funny and a bit embarrassing, and kind of shaped everything that I now do, is that I'm the performance expert that's burnt himself out properly twice. I obviously didn't do it well enough the first time, so I thought I'd give it a crack again the second time. And that's when I kind of started to really unpack and discover what were the things that actually caused that to happen. And I think a lot of that does come down to expectations, as well as deeply understanding the strategies that you've actually got going on in the background that you might not have been actually consciously aware of. So, like, I'm a self-confessed performance junkie. I'm a complete adrenaline junkie. I do crazy shit like big ultra marathon runs and things like that, kind of just because, or I thought it was just because. But I know that where I start to learn to grow and expand is when I'm right at the edge. And I think there's this tension of taking yourself this edge to this kind of optimal space, but not going over the edge is what's really exciting. But very, very, very difficult to manage if you're not consciously aware. So I think a really good way of expanding a little bit on expectations is really understanding actually what are the intentions that you have. And what I mean by that is that when you set a goal, So, and let's call, if we call a goal an expectation, maybe that's a good way to frame it. If we say, like, we've got this goal and it's an expectation that we will meet that goal, I think a key risk for lots of people is that the goal becomes the dominant factor. And goal achievement starts to outweigh the importance of how you want to, the intention you have of how you want to experience the journey towards that goal. And if you kind of go, I don't care what I've put myself through to achieve that goal, because that's just all that's important, then I think you can get blindsided and you end up in very dangerous territory. Whereas if you go, the intention of achieving this goal is actually to experience, and it's a bit of a cliche to say experience the journey and stuff like that. So let me put this in a more real kind of sense. So a couple of weeks ago, I went and walked up a big hill, Bluff Knoll here in WA, and it's being winter. Me and SJ, my wife, kind of went down there with the kids, and we're kind of going, we're going to walk up Bluff Knoll with the intention, obviously, the expectation or the goal is to get to the top. But the underlying expectation of that is that you hope you get to the top and you can kind of see a view, so that you can actually see what you've achieved and it's amazing and all this kind of stuff. But before we kind of went, I kind of went, look, hey guys, it's winter and weather changes really quick. So actually, rather than just rush to the top of this, maybe if we kind of understand that every step along the way, we have an opportunity to see where we're going and enjoy that experience of getting to the top. Whatever happens when we get to the top, whether we can see or can't see, we can feel good about what we've achieved. And I think setting expectations, but making decisions about what intentions you take in is actually where a key, would you call it a paradox? I don't know. It would be maybe like a clinky kind of point and an attention kind of point comes. And I see this with individuals that I work with. I see it in organizations that you work with, where the goal outcome is the entire focus. Yeah. But actually what we all know is it's the small steps and how we feel through that process is the thing that keeps motivation high. And you can argue, well, you break stuff down into lots of micro goals, and yes, you do, and that's also really helpful. But even within those micro goals, you still need to know how you want to experience that process so that you don't lose sight of what it is that you're doing, and more importantly, how you want to be. So I think when you're going for a goal, you can ask yourself that question all the time. Is this helping me to be better? Or am I being better on this journey on this particular day? So
yeah, I like that distinction. There's I've seen a couple of very interesting things here in WA where we both live. There's a massive mining sector, and I've been in a couple of places where they've set it's slightly different to the to goals that are around self-improvement or becoming better, but I think illustrates the point that you've just made, which is that safety is a massive piece on those mine sites. And I've seen a couple of places where they've got key performance indicators around particular safety mechanisms, where the intent that sits behind it is obviously to make people safer. You know, the whole point of that is that, you know, men and women who work on those sites get to go home to their families with all their fingers and toes intact and you know, happily well, both physically and mentally. And one mine site I visited had a little report that people would write out for incidents that they'd seen. So they were not big. I think they called them safety exceptions. So they weren't massive things. But they were potential problems. And they actually had a KPI for how many of these things people had to report for each shift. And so people were literally making it up. They were filling these pieces of paper out just so they could meet the target. And And I said, well, I asked a guy, I said, doesn't that cause a problem? Like if you're reporting things that aren't actually happening, don't you end up then having to do something about them? And he said, oh no, we've worked out that, there's a level. If you report something that's like this, it'll get the tick in the box, but nothing will happen because it's minor enough to be, oh well. Reporting it and raising awareness is good enough. And I think that's a classic example of where a target has completely overridden and surpassed in importance what the intention is, because that system becomes completely irrelevant for its original intent, which is keeping people safe. And in fact, probably has the opposite effect, because people become somehow immune to the conversation that it was originally designed to draw them into.
Yeah.
When it comes to personal stuff, so I've always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with goals. I've never found them to be a particularly useful tool.
Yeah.
Partly because I have a bit of, we talked about this when I was involved in your program. I've got a bit of a default that is, if I feel like I'm being told what to do, my attitude is resistance. The conversation we were having with Doug just before this call started, and some of the people in the US at the moment going, "You can't make me do whatever," is perhaps driven by that same mindset where I don't know how widespread it is, but certainly I talk to a lot of people where if they feel like they're being told what to do, there's almost this unthinking. I don't care if it's logical. I don't care if it's good for me. My answer is no,
Yeah.
And sometimes I find that nailing that intention piece that you're talking about and working more around an area of focus. So, I want to improve my general physical well-being, rather than having a specific goal for it. It's like, all right, so here are the levers I can pull that will have an impact on that. And let me just focus on this for a while. What's your thought there? I know that there's two really sometimes strongly argued schools of thought between goals and areas of focus.
Yeah, look, I think I'm learning, I think, to live more in the camp that I think you're explaining around the construct of goals is important, but equally important of the concept of goals is actually, once you've set a goal, the importance is to actually let go of the goal. To set the goal and then forget about it, because you've already, but here's the thing, and I think this is the differentiating point that most people don't get, is that in order to set a goal that's actually meaningful and helpful and useful, what you actually need to have done before that becomes real is you need to have made a decision to actually achieve that goal. Now, that might sound super obvious, where you go, yeah, of course, I've made a decision to achieve that goal. But how many people have done the bullshit principle of setting a New Year's Eve resolution just because they feel like they need to, but actually they have made zero decision around that? So what happens is you start off strong, and then as soon as it gets hard, your little genetic flaw that you talk about, which you were very polite in the way that you put it compared to when we were talking about before, but that comes out because it goes, actually, why am I doing this? Because I haven't actually made the decision. And I think that leads very true into the concept of being better. Because if you haven't actually made the decision to be better, I think we're wired to find all the reasons as to why it is that we shouldn't be doing this. Because we're not in conviction about the actual goal. We're not in conviction about the process. And if we're not in conviction about the process, the subtext of what that means is that we haven't really given ourselves permission to do it, for the first point. The second point is we haven't really prioritized what's actually important. So we haven't gone to that level of thought. So we can't really make the decision.
Yeah.
So if we haven't given ourselves the permission in the first place to get better, we haven't prioritized what we realize we need to do to get better, then we cannot make an effective decision. So what it actually means is that we either procrastinate or we just give it away. So I think there's lots and lots and lots of people that you can talk to that are still deciding about making a decision about a whole bunch of stuff. And I think once you recognize that making a decision is really different from thinking about making a decision. Yeah. Then actually a whole bunch of the rhetoric that goes around, I'm not good enough, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough energy, I don't have enough headspace, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough of this. What most of those things actually are subtext reasons which actually sit behind the fact that we actually haven't made the decision. So we get buried in the content of that I'm not whatever enough, or I don't have enough of this, rather than being kind of honest with ourselves and going, actually, do you know what? I actually haven't actually made the decision. I'm still thinking about it, but I haven't made the decision. Because I reckon when we've been speaking about this, Mike, about you writing your next book, your Unshakable book, is that you made a very clear decision a while back that this is actually what you were going to do. So it's not up for question anymore.
Yeah.
And actually, you don't really need motivation, which I think is another beautiful excuse. I don't have the motivation. I don't have the willpower. All those things that come out. You don't need that anymore. Because you've actually made a very firm, unshakable, you've made an unshakable decision to write that book.
Yeah.
So even though you don't like goals, you're blooming awesome at setting them. But I reckon you're an expert in decision making. Because that's actually how you then go about framing all the things that you do. So all we then have to do is focus on the process. We don't need to worry about whether it's good enough, whether it's not good enough, whether we're going to get there, whether we're not going to get there.
Yeah.
And that's super easy to say, but not quite as easy to execute. So theoretically, I'm sure all of that makes a lot of sense, but the practical realities of bringing all of that to life,
yes,
is actually the thing that keeps you and I kind of doing the work that we do. And that's why we love doing the work that we do, because it's a minefield.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think you've nailed something really important there, Jeremy, about decision. It's certainly my experience personally is that the times that I have decided something, it's pretty much look out, and you'll adjust along the way and take variables into account and potentially modify timeframes and approaches. But as you say, once that decision's made, it's almost like you're already at the finish line, and now you've just got to paint fill in the colour by numbers piece between here and the finish line.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's actually fascinating. As you were talking about that, I was thinking, we've talked a lot on these calls about the survivor personality. There's a whole bunch of work in the realm of psychology exploring the traits of people who survive against the odds.
Yeah.
Whether that's, medical diagnoses or prisoners of war, or they lost or stranded in the bush. One of those characteristics is that they pretty much just decide they're not going to die.
Yeah.
And they've normally got the intent piece behind that is usually very strong. So they'll say things like, my work wasn't complete yet, so it wasn't my time to die, or I had to get back to my family, my kids need me, or, I've got some some unfinished business in the world. You know, I need to go back and have this conversation with that person or whatever. And it's like, whatever that focus is, whatever that intent is clear enough for them to say, I'm not going to die. Now, at a fundamental level, it doesn't change anything. Like the reality is, whatever circumstances they're up against are still the circumstances they're up against, and the reality is they might die. But it makes for a much more active participation in that process. So, you know, it's like, I will do whatever is within my power, reasonable and possibly unreasonable, to ensure that doesn't happen on my watch.
Yeah.
So it puts agency, I think, back in people's hands, that, you know, that definite decision.
Yeah.
And I also know there's been plenty of times where it's like, I know I need to eat better. You know, I've been fanging the chocolate pretty hard and I've whacked on a couple of extra kilos and I'm feeling sluggish. And so you go, well, after this block, I'll do better, you know. And it's like, it's not really a decision. You're kind of going, well, I'm deciding to eat this right now. And then tomorrow you go, oh, well, you know, I can do that later. So I'll just have a sneaky one as I go down the confectionery aisle in the local supermarket, and you just roll past potential points of action with a half-assed decision.
Yeah. Because this when you start talking about it like that, Mike, hey, because so if making the decision is the kind of outcome that we're generating, I think there's a whole bunch of stuff that sits behind that as well, hey? Because essentially, especially if you're kind of going for a goal for something that you've never done before, like, say, maybe writing a book. Yeah. So we've both written books, and I'm sure the first time, so I'm just in the process of starting my next book, which interestingly enough is going to be called Decide, because I reckon this is a pretty important point that people don't. We think we're making highly effective decisions all the time. I see it personally. I see it with the leaders that I mentor. I see it with elite athletes. I see it across businesses, that we have convinced ourselves that we're highly effective in making a decision. But actually what sits behind a lot of those decisions is actually kind of our belief systems that are actually in operation, which we're either consciously aware of or not consciously aware of. And a lot of this goes into an identity piece as well. There's who am I through this process of making a decision. So my wife's amazing at this. She's run like 4 half marathons. But she's not a runner. So in her mind, she's not a runner. She doesn't run. She just happens to have run 4 half marathons. But but that's only a comparison piece, hey? Because I'm the pain in the arse who's in the house that's run marathons and ultra marathons and stuff like that. So she doesn't see herself as a runner. And interestingly enough, I don't even see myself as a runner. That's not an identity piece. If someone said, "Who are you?" I go, "I'm a runner." I would go, "No, I just happen to run for the challenge, and that's just one way." But because I haven't really made a conscious decision of being a runner, it's just that that's one of the things that I do that helps me be more effective. And helps me keep my physical, mental, emotional system in balance. And I think there's a good conversation in here is about energy and about how balancing our energy, both physically, mentally, and emotionally, is one of the key fundamentals. That even if you've made the point to make a decision, to enable us to continue to be hyper effective all the time, if our system, physically, mentally, emotionally, and if you want to go there spiritually, I am strongly of the belief that if that system or ourselves as a process are not in balance, then you will not be operating. You will not be in a position where you can be better. You might struggle through. You can try and run an ultra by being super physically fit. But once you get to like 40 Ks, the distance is irrelevant and the physical side of stuff is irrelevant. It's purely a mental and emotional game. Unless, of course, you actually crash out of energy, like the actual glucose that you need to run your system and stuff like that. So, and I think this links into leadership and it links into life, is that once we get to master our own energy systems and understand when we're at the point where we feel like we need to be at our best, a lot of the other decisions which were surface decisions, I don't know, do I have that bar of chocolate? That you don't even need to think about them anymore. They drift away because it's now not who you are. Because if you are, so one of my big things is, as you said, Mike, is about vitality and living in vitality. And that's the definition of me, of physical, mental, emotional all together, because then we feel vital, then we feel re-energized. So I'm hyper conscious, and I still track it every single day at 6 times of the day. Where am I physically, mentally, and emotionally? To understand patterns, to see the things that I can then look to adjust and change and continue to work on. Because I'm no absolute guru on this whole thing, because just like anything, my energy systems go up and down. But what I've noticed ever since I designed that to get myself out of burnout for the second time, I fluctuate much less over different periods of the day, and I've become hyper aware about what I eat, what I drink, how much I sleep, how much I'm moving, because all these things are so fundamental to even start the conversation around the fact, am I going to get better? Because if you don't have those things, so I've just got a heater on it here, it's boiling. There you go, physically I'm hot. If you don't have those things in balance, and I think you then try and go after like big goals and stuff like that, you're going to find it super hard. And there's a very small percentage of the population that actively tracks physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I think, when you did this exercise, when we were doing that stuff at the start of COVID, we think we know what our energy levels are, hey? So when I first start working with people, I go and get them to rate themselves on an energy curve. Are you burnt out, stressed out, flat out, or are what I call fired up? Are you woken up, or are you leveled up? Where do you feel like you are from an energy perspective? But that's only useful for a very short period of time. Like it's like it's like a photo, not like a video.
Yeah.
So all it is a photograph of going, right now, this is where I am. But we need to understand that a little bit more. And as soon as you dive deeper into that, and you go physical, mental, emotional, and then you break it to 6 different points of the day, you start to really go, well, okay, I didn't realize that kind of conversation maybe that I have with someone is so draining. I walk away exhausted. Either mentally and emotionally, probably not physically, but mentally and emotionally. And I think a lot of people being on Zoom through COVID have noticed that their physical energy levels and their mental energy levels and their emotional energy levels are very different on a video conference compared to being in person. So all that stuff, I reckon, is hyper important if we even want to start the process of being better. But it's kind of confronting, because we kind of reckon that we're okay, I think, and we are. But the question is, where do you want your energy levels to be? And if you keep your energy levels super high as much of the time as you can, you're in a fantastic spot to achieve whatever goal it is you want to achieve.
So that's a really valid point around energy, and I think speaking to the people I've spoken to in my own experience, and some people who actually, like us, make their profession assisting people and organisations to find their edges and to work in better and more effective ways, through COVID found, they've really hit flat spots. and that it's a little bit of a roller coaster, and some of this is perhaps due to well, I reckon it's about we don't have any direct control over what's going on. The outcomes of this thing are, globally are outside of the control of any one of us.
Yeah.
Outside of the control of any one government, even one country. So it's a significantly large issue. Now, I would argue that that's actually pretty much the state of play all the time. It's just that COVID has made it really abundantly clear that there's a whole lot of stuff that's outside of our control. For people that are struggling energy-wise, or who are, feeling a bit sort of weighed down by the whole situation, what would be a couple of quick tips from your arsenal that help them sort of bend that curve back in the right direction, so that some of the conversations we're having are more, that puts them more in a space where they could even contemplate the conversation? Because I think one of the realities at the bottom of that curve is it's pretty hard to see a way out sometimes. So
so I guess one of my specialities is working with people who are recovering from or concerned that they're going into burnout. Obviously, for obvious reasons, that it's a complete passion of mine and something that we need to be hyper aware of and not ashamed of. And the first thing I always get people to do is to first build the level of awareness about where they're actually at, but by being and be brutally honest with yourself, with love and compassion for yourself, but be brutally honest to go, actually, how am I honestly feeling? Like, what's going on? And I don't want to do a plug on here, but if the whole Better Projects thing that I've created a whole thing called www.thebetterproject.com.au, and on that is a vitality tracker tool that you can use for free to help you to assess where you are physically, mentally, and emotionally. Because most people will go off half-cocked to go and make changes without really having an awareness about what needs to change. So we try and make these adjustments and changes and go, it must be my diet, so I'll change my diet. But most people who it's a diet thing, that's not the access point. That's just what they want to try and do to make a change. The most important thing that I say to these people is to use something like the Vitality Tracker to actually just take a week to assess where they're honestly at and what's going on at different points of the day, so that they can build their own data set, so that they can start to understand for themselves what's the most important factor. Because when we look at vitality physically, mentally, and emotionally, all of us have a dominant access point and a dominant thing that is most powerful in the way that we can go about making change and how we can go about making decisions. For me, that happens to be physical. So if my physical energy is low, mentally and emotionally, I will be impacted. Now, other people, it might be mentally, if they're low, that has the knock-on consequence of emotionally and therefore physically, because then they don't go and exercise. So everyone's different. And we need to first learn what our dominant access point is. So because I exercise every single day without fail, I notice immediately my energy levels if I don't. But also a lot of our work is deep thinking and emotional connection. So I have to do that to make sure that I can be the best that I can be on a daily basis. So I would honestly say, first off, make sure you actually get an understanding. So I don't say where you are on this thing and you go, I'm just burnt out. Because to go, okay, so why? What's that all about? What is the data really telling you? Because it will give you a much heightened conscious awareness of what's really actually happening. And then it comes down to basic principles that we all know, but we don't necessarily do. You know, it honestly comes down to getting good quality sleep. It comes down to the amount of caffeine and booze that you drink. It comes down to how much you're exercising. It comes down to water intake. It comes down to sleep quantity and quality. But we're all the same kind of system. So those are the key basics of what we all know we need to focus on to be better. The question is, what are the habits and behaviors that sit underneath that, and what are those all about, so that we can make different and better choices around those things that we're actually doing. So, you know, James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about the power of 1% of improvement and the power of marginal gains. And he uses the phrase of habits are the compound interest of self-improvement that I absolutely love. I think it's a great quote. But the thing that I want to take his thinking a little bit further is that a 1% change on a daily basis, even though it sounds small, it's actually quite big. So to change 1% every day, it's really easy to say, oh yeah, I can do 1%.
Yeah.
But then you reverse it a little bit and go, okay, so as humans, we make about 35,000 close to conscious decisions, or more as adults rather than as humans, because kids not so much. But as adults, we make close to 35,000 close to conscious decisions on a daily basis. So if we were going to follow James Clear's principle, that would mean we would have to make 350 better choices every day. Now, that's a truckload of better choices to make. So I reckon we should make it even more achievable and go of what I've called the 0.1% rule, which is actually, and even this sounds intimidating now, of making 35 better choices every day. But these are like so small. These are micro choices. This is, do I have that glass of water an hour later? Do I have this can of Coke? Do I have a chocolate bar? Do I get up and walk and stretch because I know I need to? You know, what time do I go to the toilet now? But it's these many micro decisions, I think, are the things that will change people's lives. Even more so than, say, the 1% rule, the theory of aggregate gains and habit stacking and all that. But if you make 35 better choices and you're conscious about it every day and catch yourself and get in the habit of catching yourself, over the course of a year, that's going to be 12,775 better decisions that you're going to make. And that's a lot. Yeah. And imagine if you knew on, say, waking up tomorrow, you knew over the next 12 months you were going to make nearly 13,000 better decisions. That's like super empowering, where I reckon you literally could shift the way that you live your life over that period. And I think that might be, talking out loud, that might be the crux of what the Decide book is actually all about, is that. So how do we go about making these more conscious, many micro decisions? Because that's the stuff that changes your life, not, as you say, the big goal, because it's all those micro decisions that take you to that big goal.
Yeah.
So do we have to become goal obsessed? I don't think so. I think rather than having a goal and a clear vision, I think understanding the general direction that we want to travel, but having, you know, like a book, I want to write a book, that's a useful thing to do. And then just let go of it and know how I get there will work out along the way. But I know if I break that down and all these small decisions, and even knowing that going for your daily walk with your dog, Mike, is actually the thing that writes your book. And linking your daily behaviors through to the goal that you're looking to achieve is really helpful, because it gives you the permission to go for that run, because I know going for that run is actually writing my book. You know, I know I've got to actually sit down and physically type and stuff, but if I don't do that run, then maybe I'm not going to be as effective at writing that book, or I've got to rework sentences or a whole bunch of stuff like that. So I hope that answers your question. That's
absolutely. Absolutely. I would absolutely echo what you've said, that the process of using that vitality tracker of yours is really useful as a starting point for understanding, what's some of the cause and effect, not just immediate this versus that, but, the accumulation of things and the patterns over a day or a week. It's a really useful starting point. Jeremy, thanks very much for joining us. It's been really useful, and we could go into this in a lot more depth. It's no small topic. If people want to track you down and find you, where can they do that?
You can go to my website, which is www.jeremywatkins.com.au. As I was saying to you just before, this is actually being massively reworked at the moment. So what you're going to see is going to be different in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
So you can do that. You can find me on LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. I've got a hashtag of the Barefoot Leader, but that's a different story. But what I'd really love people to do is I want to make it about the people who are the listeners. Is that if this energy conversation and if this vitality piece is something that is really kind of motivating you or making you super curious about it, I would love you to go to the Better Project. And I would absolutely love and encourage people to go and register and log on for that, which is www.thebetterproject.com.au. And you can register for the Vitality Tracker and use it, and it will help you to identify all the things we've been talking about today. It's all free. It's just my passion. It's my passion project. Because I think the more people that build that conscious awareness around the things that they know are stopping them from being better, then the more power they're going to have to make powerful, positive choices and make powerful, positive decisions. And really, that's what my world's all about. So if people take that up, then I really hope that it adds value to your life, because it's saved me a couple of times now. And I know it's just a really beautiful, with a little bit of a caveat that you're going to love me and hate me at the same time, because it is a pain in the ass to do it. It's not an easy process, because you're learning a new habit of doing something new. Mm-hmm. So it's all about the tracker, and it's nothing about the tracker as well. That's the cool thing about it.
For sure. All right. Well, look, we'll wrap it there. Thanks very much, Jeremy, and I look forward to talking to you soon.